40 here. Welcome to 40 University. Got a real life academic, someone who got her PhD. Unlike 40, I didn't even graduate with my BA, but I love the world of academia because my father got two PhDs. So I love the life of the mind. And you, Dr. Lisa Munro, you wrote an essay that affected a lot of people. So I just want to read a few paragraphs from this essay. You wrote it in 2017, I believe. I've been out of academia for 2 years, having finished my PhD in 2015. I think I'm finally on the road to healing. I often joke that leaving academia feels like the worst breakup ever, except that I'm not joking. Giving up on something you thought was your life's calling hurts like hell when you experience rejection from the entire industry of academia after devoting years of your life and thousands of dollars to become an academic. Betrayal and rage sometimes become your only emotions for a good long while. So it's now about 4 years since you published this. What does it feel like to have these words read back to you?
And hello, and thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm so excited to do your show.
Thank you.
I think I'm a little bit, so there's a lot of quit lit. Like a lot of academics, when they leave academia, they write these, and people have done it sort of better than I ever will. But a lot of people find, I think, some solace in writing about their experiences, because this really does feel traumatic for people. These lives that we expected to have, these jobs we expected to have, this culture we expected to have, does not exist, or we are excluded, or it's untenable, or for lots of different reasons it's not working out. And it really does feel awful. I mean, I think I spent probably, let's see, that was 2017. I graduated in 2015, so I was 2 years out from my PhD and still trying to make sense of what had happened. Who am I now? What does this mean? Am I still a scholar? Should I bother with my scholarship? What will I do with my life now? Everything seemed very up in the air and very uncertain at that time. And so I look back on it, and I'm a little bit embarrassed about it now, but it really did feel that way. And so now I've just, I actually, after that, in 2018, I actually ended up getting a job with a very tiny college, directing a study abroad program. And that was really great until I got laid off in December because of COVID. And so I said to somebody, I said, the first time you break up with academia, it feels absolutely awful. And the second time is kind of meh, like it's just not that big of a deal anymore. So, because I've already been through lots of life transition, and it just was sort of one more life transition.
So the intensity of the emotions has become both less frequent and less intense?
Yeah, I think so. It's become, it has become part of my story, but it's not the story anymore. At the time I wrote my essay, it was the story. Those feelings were absolutely the story. And now I look back on that and I'm like, yeah, that's part of it. But I've got some other stuff going on too, and new feelings and new projects. And, life is okay. Things turned out okay.
And I noticed on your Twitter bio something I don't recall seeing before, though I'm sure it's been there for probably hundreds of people, but you put adoptee in your Twitter profile. So
yeah.
Is that rare? Because I don't recall seeing that before.
I put that there because I want people who are adopted to be able to find me. That's become an important marker of identity for me in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. I've started really connecting with people who have had that same experience, and there are a lot of similarities. And I talk about that experience a lot on Twitter because I think we all have this idea that being adopted is such a great, it's so great, right? It's a win-win-win it's an easy solution to social problems. and then if you start thinking about it for a couple minutes, it starts getting infinitely more complex and more complicated, and has some, and these really significant problems start coming to light. So I'm pretty active on Twitter talking about that.
At what age did you learn you're an adoptee?
Ooh, always. My parents, there are a lot of parents who, my parents, I could be any adopted kid in the 70s, but my parents adopted me at this point when adoptive parents were finally being told to tell as early as possible. And so my parents did that. So it was like, we always like read these like kids books, and there was a lot of kind of normalizing that experience in my family. So like there was never like a gotcha or a surprise moment. It was like just something I always knew, but I didn't start thinking about it until much later in my life, when I started searching for family and searching for some medical history and searching for what I felt like were these missing pieces of my life.
And how old were you when you were adopted?
I was 2 months old, so that's it's not uncommon for kids to be adopted at birth. So it took me, so I was in foster care, and it's weird not knowing where you were for the first couple months of your life. That's sort of strange. And then, I don't have any baby pictures from those months either. Like it's just kind of a missing, it's kind of a hole. So it's a little, yeah, it feels a little strange to not have some of those pieces still.
And I can't help but asking, what kind of relationship have you had with your adopting parents?
They're great. My dad died a couple years ago. My mom and I have a great relationship. And I often tell people, when I tell people that I've searched and I've found birth family and continue to have a relationship with them, a lot of times people will ask me, well, like, what does your mother think? And I'm like, well, she's fine. Like, I'm struggling. She's fine. So it's interesting how yeah, it's searching and finding. It's often, I think we see it as a rejection of parents. But I really think you can have a wonderful relationship with your adoptive parents and still want to know these things that they can't tell you.
And did you have siblings, either biological and or in your adoptive family?
Yes, I have one adopted brother and two biological half brothers. So I'm wealthy in brothers.
And when did you find out who your biological parents were, and what kind of relationship have you had with them?
I was 38 years old, which seems so late, but I think that's not uncommon in the adoptee community. A lot of people, some people are still waiting until their adoptive parents die before they search because they're so afraid of hurting their feelings. And that was not my case. But I wanted to, there were just things I wanted to know. I wanted to know medical history. I wanted to see someone who looked like me, and I wanted to know kind of what their story was. So I was 38 years old, and I searched and I gathered up all this. It's a long story, but I did a lot of research, and through researching in public records, I was able to make contact.
And what happened?
It was, yeah, it's a big moment when you make contact because you don't know what the response is going to be. Is this person going to reject you? I mean, a lot of birth mothers from the 60s and 70s, they were told to never, never, never talk about their children ever again, pretend that they were dead. So you can imagine it's very shocking when someone does make contact. And so I wrote a letter and I said, based on this research I did, I think this is who you are in my life. And I have, I'm happy to make contact with you in any way that you feel is appropriate. And I sent the letter, and I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited. And finally a letter came back. That was affirmative and positive and welcoming. So yeah, we have a nice relationship. We talk every now and then.
And what about your biological father?
I never met him. I'm in contact with his family, but he was dead by the time I found him.
And your half brothers, what was it like meeting them? And I assume that was at
Yeah.
38 too.
There's Yeah, they're so wonderful. It's it's challenging. I mean, because you have to the ideas that even though you share biology, there's no shared history, right? Like they don't get your jokes maybe, and you don't get their jokes, and you're like, what? Oh, right, because we didn't grow up together. We grew up in different places and with different parents and different values, and it is challenging to create those kinds of relationships, but they have been so wonderful and so welcoming.
And what was the happiest year of your life?
Oh, the happiest year of my life. God, that's a good question. I don't know if I've had like one single happiest year. I don't know. I mean, I can think of like events my along my life, like the PhD graduation, that was pretty big. I'm pretty happy. College graduation, that was pretty big. Yeah, getting my first apartment. It's like, so there are these events that I can really think of, but I can't think of a whole year that's been like the happiest.
Childhood, fairly unhappy, average, above average
Uh,
in
oh,
happiness?
I think it was probably above average. I mean, it's hard to say. It was challenging in certain respects, but there was love and there was joy there too.
So I was shocked listening to a previous podcast that you'd done where you talked about you hated high school. Why did you hate
Oh,
high school?
yes. Oh, I thought it was so dumb. It just seemed there was nothing about it that interested me. Absolutely nothing. It it seemed kind of dumbed down, and it didn't answer any questions. I mean, I hated all my history classes. I thought they were dumb. Because it was that kind of like really bad history where you just memorize a bunch of facts and some dates, and that was boring. Um, and then people kept telling me that I should go to high school so I could learn social skills, and I was like, what? I don't. Yeah, I don't think I don't think high school is a microcosm of the world. I just think it's bigger than that. So I ended up dropping out of high school. So I finished my, let's see, I finished my sophomore year, tried to go back for my junior year and just didn't like it any better. So yeah, I'm sort of missing 2 years of high school.
Oh, what about middle school? Did you hate middle school? Sixth, seventh, and
Yeah,
eighth grade?
hated middle school as well. I think those are hard years for anybody though. I think those are challenging, I think, for everybody.
Well, I mean, challenging, yeah, but most people, in my experience, like going to school because they get to see their friends. So, what about your friends? Did you have friends?
Yeah, I had a couple friends. I'm the kind of person who has like maybe one or two good friends, but not a huge crowd of friends. So, yeah, high school never felt like where I needed to go to see friends. And my friends were also kind of bad kids who didn't go to school, so I didn't have to go to school to see them.
Were the other kids mean to you?
I think everybody, well, I don't know if everybody goes through, but yeah, it's like there's some bullying involved, but yeah, it just didn't feel like I don't know. I was curious about a lot of things in the world, and I just didn't feel like school was the place to get those answers.
And then interesting because I mean, you talk about high school is not the real world, but so many of the dynamics that play out in high school do play themselves out as you go through life because the people who who enjoy high school are usually, connected with other people, have some degree of popularity, and they learn how to work the system. All right, education educates you in how to work the system. Is that fair?
I guess that's fair. I think I don't have a lot of tolerance for systems that I don't particularly appreciate.
What led you to pursue a PhD? So I think, were you 26 when you graduated with your BA?
I was 28.
28.
I was let's see, I had gone as after the high school dropout, I had worked for a couple of years at some bad jobs. I went to community college, which I'm pretty sure saved my life. It just was happening at the right time. It was a good program in a place that wasn't my hometown, and it felt like starting over, and it worked for me. It really worked for me. And community college was it felt really safe. It felt like a safe place to be who I wanted to be. And so it was a good experience. So I graduated there with an associate's degree in veterinary technology. And then I worked for several years as a veterinary technician. And then one of the veterinarians that I worked with, he said, "Lisa, you can't keep working here." And I said, "What? What do you mean I can't keep working here? Of course I can keep working here." He said, "You need to do something with your life. You need to go to college." I was like, "What? Oh my God." I said, What would I do?" He said, "Well, based on what you like in the world, you'd probably be really good at something like English or history." And I said, "Well, where would I go?" And he said, "Well, there's a bunch of small 4-year colleges in Colorado, which is where I'm from." And so I picked one, and it turned out, I was 26 years old, and I enrolled as a sophomore at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado.
But what led you to go to graduate school? And was it at age 28 that you made that decision?
It was not. So I took more time off, because this seems to be my story. I took more time off. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I enrolled for 2 years, 2.5 years actually, as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I went to Guatemala. It was the first time. I was 28 years old. It was the first time I had left the country. It was terrifying, but here I was in this foreign country trying to work on these small-scale development projects, and learn some Spanish in the meantime. But what I learned about Guatemala was that it has this very terrible history of civil war and an even longer history of U.S. intervention. And it's quite a tragic story on a lot of levels. And I wanted to understand that better. I wanted to understand how that had come to be and why people in the United States didn't seem to know anything about it. So I went from my Peace Corps service. I applied to graduate school. I got into the University of Arizona, and I ended up with a PhD in Latin American history.
So at what age did you begin your graduate studies?
Let's see, that
32?
would have been, I think I was like 31, 32, somewhere in there. Yeah.
And then it took 8 years to complete your PhD. Is that accurate? 2015?
Yes. Yeah. Let's see. Yep. It would have taken 7 or 8. So yes, 7 or 8, because I got a master's in there somewhere. And yeah, it takes about 7. I think I did the PhD in 5. Let's see, is my chronology right? Let's see. I think I finished my master's, I think in 2009. And then I signed a piece of paper to go on to the PhD program. And then I graduated like at the end of 2014, the beginning of 2015.
Now, education is usually, formal education is usually education to conform. Is that fair? How true is that? What's your experience with regard to education is a factory for producing conformism?
Well, I think it's going that way. I mean, I think as we continue down certain political and economic paths, I think college really exists to train workers, not so much thinkers. And so I think that's part of the reason that, and I mean, specifically training like people for like low wage jobs. I don't think a college education means today what it did maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 40 years ago. I think today there's a lot of pressure to get enough education to try and get a good job, but I think those jobs are increasingly scarce. And I also think there's also pressure to take courses that are not humanities based. So a lot of students who do that, they're kind of missing this whole critical thinking piece that you get with humanities courses. And I don't think that's an accident. A lot of students have told me like, ooh, I really wanted to major in history, but you know, my dad wanted me to major in business so I can get a job. I'm like, well, yep, here we are, training workers, not thinkers. So I think there is pressure to conform. I think school definitely has that capability.
So I'm just going to share one anecdote from my life. I trained for 3 years
good.
to be a teacher of the Alexander technique. And in my final week of training, just 2 days before I was due to graduate, I had published a blog post where I criticized a certain approach to the Alexander technique. And as a result of that, I was denied graduation, denied my certificate because I'd broken the code. Alexander teachers are not to criticize other Alexander technique teachers in public. And I blew up at the time I had good relations with all 5 of my primary teachers. So I forever destroyed those relationships. They have not been repaired. Those are blown up. Also, pretty much everyone in the school or anyone who heard of me realized that I was someone to shun. Right? This is someone who speaks out of school. This is not someone who's popular. This is the person who shows you what not to do. Now, I did get the certificate 3 months later, and I didn't protest because I realized I had broken the code, and I was fine with that. But I think my story kind of exemplifies this point about conformism. I know throughout my life being educated, I would often encounter a teacher who would say, I never had a student who pushed me as much as you did. And that wasn't a good thing. They didn't like that. My grades often paid a price for it. What's your experience with educators trying to get you to conform?
Let's see, educators trying to get me to conform. Well, I will say in junior high and high school, I would often be found listening to Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall, and we don't need no education.
Yes.
We don't need no thought control. So it's yes, I have kind of a long history of that. I like education when it can be creative, when it can encourage people to pursue individual inquiry. But I find as it's become, I think, more corporate, more focused on the bottom line, focused on student retention, as education gets away from the business of actually educating students, I think there is greater and greater pressure to conform, to pass students who maybe don't really pass your class. To say that students have higher language levels than they do. I find a lot to dislike there in formal education settings.
Like that, but that's my life experience. Did you have similar or different experiences to that?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that? I cut out for just a minute.
Sure. My experience with education is that the way to succeed is to get along with your teachers and to repeat back to them the things that they've taught you. So
yes,
teachers love nothing more than to have you repeat back with, just enough variation so it makes it sound authentic. What's your experience?
I think that's I think a lot of students have been trained to do that these days, much to my great dismay. I think there is less emphasis on like you said, independent thought, less emphasis on um, thinking outside. God, I hate this corporate business speak. Thinking outside of the box, saying something that's maybe not what your teacher taught you. Having your own analysis about things, having your own thoughts about things. I think a lot of that is discouraged, and I think the predominant way that we evaluate students is through grades, and grades obviously don't reflect whether students are actually learning. Grades more often than not, I think, reflect what we want to hear as educators.
Right, you're getting indoctrination. I mean, there may
Mm-hmm.
be some genuine intellectual material, but it's overall, it seems like an indoctrination into, particularly at a university level, into a particular discipline. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, I think there's like I'm thinking as you were talking, I was thinking about sort of this move away from students as learners in higher education and towards these models of students as consumers and students as customers. And I think that model, I think, does us no favors at all, because that's a model that very much relies on students having certain relationships with instructors that are not based around what they learn. It's based on what.
Okay. Let's see if I lost you there. Okay. Hey, are you back? You there? Okay.
I have too many buttons to push. Okay.
Yep. Okay, I can hear you now.
All right. Okay, good. Something.
So I lost the last 60 seconds. So
Oh, geez. Okay, it's my mother calling me. So let's see. I was saying about yes, students now conforming to these models of ideas of students as consumers, and what that's doing to independent thought, creative thought, educational opportunities. And I don't think that move toward, everything now is supposed to be based around free market principles. And I don't think that free market principles are really best applied to education, because I think it does create these situations where you are expected to really toe the line.
So an experience that I had with education, I noticed vaguely in elementary school, though I could not have articulated it at the time, was that every year it seemed like there was some new fad blowing through. So did you experience that?
I don't know if I experienced fads so much, but I'm thinking about, now there's a bunch of outrage on the part, at least in the US, on the conservative right, about critical race theory. Apparently, this is the thing, and I don't think that's a fad, and I don't think that's I think that's not quite what people make it out to be. I mean, like, if you were to take my class, we wouldn't necessarily discuss critical race theory, but we would discuss different kinds of systems of oppression and how they work. Is that critical race theory? I don't know. Is it a fad? I don't know.
I understand. When did you develop the idea that you were going to spend your life as a professor?
That I think came with graduate school, because I don't think that I had envisioned that prior to going to graduate school. But graduate school, I mean, if you're getting a PhD in history, it's geared towards that, right? Very few people go into graduate programs in history without the idea that they want to become a professor, and you learn how to do that. And it just seemed like we were all kind of being groomed to do that. And I thought, oh, well, this is obviously the career path. This is the logical end result. And then it turned out that was not the logical end result. But it seemed to start, it seemed to, it became very appealing. Like, oh, like really, like, oh, I have an office and I teach these classes and I read these books and I write these articles, and I thought, oh, I thought that's a nice life, because the whole, I mean, part of the reason I went to graduate school was just to read books, um, and write about them.
And then how did you realize that that wasn't going to happen and that you were better off giving up on that dream?
Oh, it's it was a long it didn't occur to me all at once. It was sort of, I was on the academic job market for a couple of years, and that went precisely nowhere. Like, I would have these interviews for these colleges that I had never heard of and places that I definitely didn't want to live. And then I think I was shortlisted a few times and that went nowhere. So it just did not seem to be going anywhere. And in the meantime, it takes, the academic hiring cycle takes a year. And in the meantime, like, what are you supposed to eat? How are you supposed to buy groceries? Like, no one tells you these things. So yeah, it became very obvious early on that I was going to have to do something else in the meantime. I mean, maybe the academic job would finally break, or maybe it wouldn't. But like, regardless of what happened, I was going to need to get some kind of a job.
Did you figure out why did some people get hired as history professors and you didn't? What separated you from those who succeeded?
Oh, I have bad feelings about this. I think there are so many good historians that have not gotten jobs, and it's easy when it's you. It's easy to fall into this. Oh my God, it's me, right? I'm not good enough to do this. My scholarship isn't good enough, and as it turns out, none of that is true. People get jobs. I've seen some very mediocre people get jobs because they are well connected, or they know people who are well connected, or they are wealthy enough to continue to go on the academic job market. And they can just do that kind of continually until they get a job. Or, maybe they have spouses who are making enough money that they can do that. I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons that people finally succeed. But if you read about academics trying to get academic jobs, it's like some people are like, oh my God, like I'm sending off my 150th job application. I'm like, oh my God, like that's amazing. And then hearing about how many applications different academic departments receive for certain jobs. I mean, 300 is not an uncommon number. So it's part of it is a numbers game. Part of it is who you know. Part of it is just dumb luck. Part of it is persistence. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons, and there are so many things you can't control. You can be absolutely the best person for the job, and you may not get it anyways. It is not regrettably, it is not a meritocracy. We would like to think it is, and it's really not. It's a combination of a lot of things that you just cannot control.
So with those PhD students who kept telling their professor, in effect, how amazing you are, I would assume that they would develop, some of them would have developed special relationships with their professor, and their professor would then take it on as a personal mission to get them hired somewhere, because then the student was going to replicate or develop upon the professor's own work. And so I would assume that's the dynamic.
That is a lot of the dynamic. So I can think of several instances that I have seen in which people have gotten jobs, maybe jobs they aren't qualified. Well, not that they're not qualified. That's the wrong way to say it. Maybe, but I've seen people who are very well connected get jobs that over other people who maybe could have gotten those same jobs.
I mean, that's just the way I see the world work. In various things that I've done, it's those who uh, develop a great relationship with their teachers, don't cause their teachers any trouble, give their teachers this impression that, you know, how thrilled you are by getting to have you as a teacher, and you want to, you know, carry on all these amazing insights that I've learned from you, and I'm so grateful to you. And then the teachers go, oh, you know, I've got a protege, I'm going to get this person hired at UCLA. I mean, that's just what I see.
Yeah. That I think is probably the way it often happens. Yeah.
Now, my mother died when I was 3, and so my father was so busy that I was essentially farmed out to foster care for about 18 months or so. And so I kept going from home to home to home in those early years. And then I think that became a pattern throughout my life, that I was always blowing up my groups that I was belonging to, always getting myself kicked out. And as I grew older, the pain didn't diminish from getting ejected from a group. It just compounded. Like, all the loss would just compound, and it was though I was being thrown around in a washing machine or a dryer. And the loss, it just kept getting, you know, more and more intense rather than diminishing. I'm wondering if childhood loss then combined with the loss of the dream of the PhD, so that you too may have experienced something like what I described.
Yes, I think that's probably a good part of my story as well. Is just that feeling, you know, early experiences, I think, of rejection really set you up um, for a lot of self-sabotage, as you described, and then also um, the expectation of future loss. So yeah, you're kind of conditioned to think about your life through these lenses of loss, and that can be very hard. And sometimes it's loss that is externally created, and sometimes it can be, I think, loss that we ourselves create. But either way, like emotionally, I think there's not a whole lot of qualitative difference between those two. I mean, loss is loss, whether you've lost parents or family, or the idea of a lifestyle that you thought you were going to have, or groups of people in your life that you thought you were going to have, or an identity. I mean, loss is loss is loss.
When did you start to get an inkling that you were setting yourself up for rejection? Because I would get an inkling throughout my life, but it only became clear, say, the last 15 years.
Yeah, I that's a really good question, and I don't know exactly when that became clear to me. I've done a lot, done a lot of therapy, done a lot of work on that, and it's been it's now I can kind of feel it. I don't know if this happens to you, but I can kind of feel it when I'm getting self-sabotagey. Like,
Yes.
ooh, I think, ooh, I think this is gonna happen. And I'm now able to step back and go, is this really what's happening? Are you making this happen? Do you want this to happen? Is this all in your head? Like, I can kind of interrogate that feeling a little bit better. But I think when I was younger, it seemed so automatic that I wasn't aware enough of how that worked for me that I could really do anything about it. So now I know that I can feel all of those feelings and have that urge to self-sabotage and create loss in my life, but I don't have to do it.
I remember I moved to America at age 11, entered 6th grade, and shortly thereafter, the most beautiful girl in the class dropped a note on my desk asking me to be her boyfriend, and I didn't know how to handle it, and so I blew it up.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
throughout my life, I've had trouble accepting good things coming easily and naturally to me. I've had a
Hmm.
great deal of discomfort with prosperity, and I've
Yes.
had a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money, and I've always found a way to blow them up. What
Hmm.
is your experience with prosperity, meaning good things coming easily?
Oh boy, yes. I've had I've come to the realization in the later years of my last couple of years of my life, I guess, that I do tend to struggle with things that seem to come easily to me, because it seems like if things come easily, they're not worth very much. And so now I made up a mantra that I say when I feel myself not wanting to accept something that comes easily. And so I say to myself, okay, so I receive and accept and value and honor that which comes to me easily. And I know it's okay that I have this. And it's just recognizing how that works has led to a lot of self-awareness and a lot of ability to tolerate greater amounts of prosperity, greater amounts of joy, greater amounts of money, better relationships. Like my tolerance for having has gone up.
My life has been marred by a compulsive need to prove. I've always carried like a chip on my shoulder that I needed to prove something to Gavin Brown and the other boys in second grade who did not want me at Gavin Brown's birthday party. And that's like being a chip on my shoulder throughout my life. How about you? Has that played any role in your life?
Yes, I think that definitely has. I mean, part of I think what being adopted sets you up for is this idea that you have to prove that you have the right to exist. And it's such a struggle because of course we have the right to exist just as people, as humans. Like it's an inalienable right, I think. But being adopted is oftentimes trying to prove that we were good enough, trying to prove that we were good enough to be kept, that we were good enough that we didn't have to be relinquished. And it really sets up this idea of having, I mean, I know it's not uncommon for adopted people, and I'm assuming as well fostered people who are fostered as children to be massive overachievers, because we are just trying to prove that we really are good enough to be on the planet with everybody else. And that kind of thinking, I think, can be very, I mean, it can take you to great heights and it can help you achieve great things, but it doesn't necessarily come from a very healthy place.
What would you say to your 16-year-old self who didn't want to go to high school anymore? What would you say now back to that 16-year-old girl?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would tell her, you know, it's going to be okay. Like it was not clear that things were going to be okay in that moment. I think I would tell her that it's okay not to be like everybody else. And it's okay to be a little bit different than everybody else and to do things in your own way. Because one of my personal patterns has been to do things in my own way. I like to, for example, let's see, what's an example? Oh, yeah, one of the great pleasures of my adult life is going on road trips by myself. I just love jumping in the car and driving somewhere. And a friend of mine said to me, God, you know, that's such a quirky and funny thing you do. And I said, really? Like, it never occurred to me that was weird. She said, you make your own roads. And I think I do. I think I'm very much invested in creating paths for myself that feel congruent with who I am. Like other people's roads don't usually work for me. And I think at the time when I was 16, I didn't know that. I thought I had to be on everybody else's road, but I don't have to be on anybody else's road but mine.
Sorry, that's a sound problem on my end, but got it fixed.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Do you need me to repeat?
Nope. I think I got it. So what would you say to your 32-year-old self who was considering going to graduate school and then developed a vision of becoming a university professor? So it's a little more than a decade later now. You've got wisdom. What would you say to your 32-year-old self who's thinking about going to graduate school and thinking about devoting and developing a life in academia?
I think my advice would be so much the same. I think I would say to myself that yeah, other people, you know that other people's roads don't usually work for you very well. So this one seems like you want this road, and it seems like this is the right road, but consider the possibility that this is not the only road.
Let me read a little bit from this Stephen Turner essay, Beyond the Academic Ethic, and get your reaction. Here's just one sentence. The basic fact of intellectual life is that it does not pay for itself. What do you think?
Ooh, let's see. The basic fact of intellectual life is that it doesn't pay for itself. Is he talking materially, as in having that life of the mind is often an expensive proposition?
He's talking financially. He's saying that if you want to be an intellectual, your odds of being able to pay for the intellectual life, getting paid for your thinking is quite slim.
It's quite slim. Everybody I know is in terrible student debt, and that's awful. But I think that's consistent with our switch to rethinking the university as the site of free market capitalism. Tuition is going through the roof, which we know, and I don't think that's going to stop. And I think eventually who was I telling? I was telling somebody this the other day. My dystopic prediction is that university education is eventually, it's going to be exclusively for people who can afford it. So it's only going to be available for a very small number of the population. Like those people maybe are going to get a decent education. Everybody else is going to get maybe like remediation or like, I don't know, just education that's not meaningful and isn't actually education. But they'll pay for it, right? Because we have to keep those wheels turning. So I think he's right in that, to have the privilege of being an intellectual, of being able to devote yourself to your writing and your thinking and your scholarship, it costs money. I mean, there is absolute cost to that, and most people cannot afford to do it for free. People ask me sometimes to do to write certain things for free or to do certain types of labor for free, and I really have to think about whether I want to accept those proposals, because I have to work to make money. And I have to think about whether or not, like, what kinds of free labor I really want to do and what kinds of labor I don't want to give away for free.
Now, smart people often get told when they're growing up, at least I often was told, do what you love and the money will follow. On the other hand, there's the opposite advice that real artists have day jobs. Which perspective do you think is more wise?
Let's see. I think I came down on the day job for a long time. I mean, I've worked some really weird jobs. One of my weird jobs after graduate school, I worked temp jobs. So I've been meaning to write an essay about the day I walked into a temp agency and I was like, hello, I have a PhD and I need a job. And they were just absolutely dumbfounded. Like they just didn't even know what to do, because they just thought, well, you have a PhD. Aren't you gainfully employed somewhere? They thought, nope, that's the problem, is that I have a PhD and I am not gainfully employed somewhere. So I did temp jobs, and mostly it's mindless data entry. I did that. And then the other job that I knew was not my heart job, it was not what I loved, but it was okay for the moment, was that I worked in crime victim advocacy. So I was, and they hired me for this job, even though I had a PhD, because I had been a Peace Corps volunteer. So I had some service experience. And then also I spoke Spanish fluently, and they needed that. So I was going out on crime scenes with law enforcement to inform victims of their rights, and answer questions and talk to them about their next steps, usually on what was the worst day of their lives. And so I did those things, and those things allowed me to buy groceries, which was important, and pay rent, and then also do some of my own writing in the meantime.
Now, what about other people you went to graduate school with who perhaps became professors? Did that place any strain on friendships?
I think choosing my own path has put me in a place, like a different emotional place than oftentimes my friends were. Like, I don't have a job where I have to put out a certain amount of scholarship to get tenure. Like, that's just not a part of my world. So sometimes it puts you in these strange places emotionally. You're just in different places, and it's okay. There's nothing bad about it. But I've been amazed at the number of people in my life who are academics, and every time I do some weird non-academic thing, like, they're cheering me on. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to start my own business. And people were like, that's great, fantastic. Let us know how it goes. How can we help?
Let me read a little bit more here from Stephen Turner. He says, academic life is selective, and the grounds for advancement at each stage are not clear, except for degree requirements. And depending on the system and the point in history, many are called who are not chosen. So the question of what sort of calling academic life has become is also a question about the calling of those who fall by the wayside. This has recently become a hot topic as a result of an op-ed by a historian who was giving up on academia after having failed, despite some short-term contracts, to gain a tenure-track job. She writes that giving up on something that you thought was your life's calling hurts like hell. When you experience rejection from the entire institution of academia after devoting years of your life and thousands of dollars to becoming an academic, betrayal and rage sometimes become your only emotions for a good long while. This comment has gone viral, and there are dozens of sites devoted to leaving academia. They tell a bitter story about the myth of academic life and its seductions. One website describes its orientation as reflecting a belief that the current system is flawed, cruel, unsustainable, and impossible to directly engage with. In this view, PhD programs with their false promises lure students to serve as cheap labor, first as teaching assistants, then as poorly paid adjuncts when tenure-track jobs elude them. Many of the comments and contributions reflect the fact that the education that the injured academics have received is highly specialized. To leave academia is to face the impossible task of repackaging their achievements as marketable skills. Any thoughts on any of that?
Oh, yeah, that's a that's a lot. I do. I mean, labor exploitation in academia is an absolute fact, and I think it does have to do with our shift towards these free market models of what education should look like. So, we do need, like, universities do need graduate students to do unpaid labor, and I mean, above that, I mean, there's adjuncts, and then there's early career researchers, and there's blah blah. I mean, so it's this whole hierarchy of exploitative labor, and I don't know that we can get away necessarily from labor exploitation. We try and minimize it where we can, but at a certain point, we're all selling our labor. But I have to say, I'm a little happier selling my labor for money than lines on my CV. So there's that. And then I also, what was the other thing I was thinking of? Oh, I did write something about whether academia was a calling. And do we think about, what makes it a calling as opposed to a job? Because ultimately, is it not just a job? I mean, hopefully in life you find employment that you love and makes you feel fulfilled and happy. But, there are a lot of people working jobs in life who don't love their jobs. So, is this not just jobs? I mean, what is it about academia that makes it seem like a calling? And why do we feel called? So I think there's a lot probably to unpack there that I'm still thinking about.
What was it like to go viral? I assume that this began as a post on your website, giving up on academia.
Yes, it's actually it is a post on my website. It was weird. I mean, I think I tweeted it probably, and then it got retweeted a little bit, and then overnight 15,000 people read it. And I went, oh my God, like That's really crazy. But clearly it had struck a nerve with people. People obviously responded to it, and it expressed something that I think resonated with a lot of people who were feeling the same, and they couldn't figure out how to articulate it. Academics hate talking about feelings, and here I was saying that leaving academia actually created grief for people, and created a certain loss of identity that people had to grieve.
What what did you get from the PhD? Like, what skills, what benefits just inherent in the process of doing a doctorate?
Yeah, it's so interesting, because what's always gotten me jobs has been my non-academic skills. Like, so my academic skills clearly are not getting me jobs. Um, but what I did learn, um, I'm a good researcher. I learned how to do research. I actually really enjoy being a historian. I enjoy historical research. I enjoy thinking about how things are different in the past and why. I like to write. I've learned my writing got much better, so that was a real plus. Um, let's see, and I think you do get tangible skills out of it. I mean, trying to manage a project as big as a dissertation is you have to figure out how to do that. But also things like softer skills, right? Like networking. How do you make friends with this group of people who you aren't necessarily friends with, and hopefully you're going to get in good with them, and hopefully they're going to help your career. Like, I mean, that's what academics do. Um, so you learn how to do things like that. Yeah, how to read strategically. And I think you get to learn a little bit about a lot of different things.
I remember when I was at UCLA, there was a fellow student who offered me something like $200 to write a paper for him, and I was momentarily tempted, and
Yeah.
then said no. But have you written papers for people? Has it been lucrative if you've done so?
No, I do not write for people, because I think they need to do that. And I have edited for people. Most of my editing is with faculty members, with early career researchers, and a lot of those people are they're writing in English as a second language, and so they do need help to articulate things in English that only maybe a native speaker um, could help with. Spanish is my second language, and I can write in Spanish, but I'm very, very slow at it, and I always need someone to check my work. So I know that faculty members trying to write in English are also struggling, if it's not their native language. So those people, I think, really do need editing services, but I don't write for people at all.
What's the line between editing and writing? And surely you've experienced pushing up against that liminal space.
Yep, I think the difference, at least for me, the difference is to not do violence to people's ideas. Sometimes I read something and I'm like, wow, that is not the conclusion I would have drawn, or yeah, I disagree with this, or it's not something that I would want to put out in the world. But they're not my ideas either. They belong to the owner of them, and my job to make um, it's not my job to do violence to their ideas. So, and also, I really think when you are correcting people's writing, it is important that they sound like them in writing, and not that they sound like whoever is doing the correction. Like, I think you really have to think about what are people's natural writing rhythms? What are the words they use? How do they construct sentences? And I think make corrections that make the sentences easier to read, but yet really reflect the writer. Because it doesn't matter if people sound like me in writing, they shouldn't. It matters if they sound like them in writing.
So you've developed a business. If you go to your website, lisamunro.net, it says, I help academic writers build sustainable and joyful writing practices in collaborative spaces. Please tell me more
Yes.
about your business.
Yes. So that's been developing over the last couple of years, and that's where I've landed with it. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to make a business out of what I knew and what I like to do, but it's turned out to be my superpower is really providing academics spaces to help them get writing done. So I do writing workshops, I do writing retreats, I teach courses, I do some writing, I do writing support for people. People call me up and talk to me about their writing. So I've become involved in how people get their writing done. Not so much in like what they say, which would be more editing, but how they're getting their writing done. Because a lot of people, um, what I discovered when I first started doing this work, I thought I would be giving people advice on like, don't use passive voice. I thought I would be giving that kind of advice. And it turned out it rapidly became obvious that was not what people needed. What people needed from me was people needed to feel a little bit better about themselves as writers and as people. And because the act of writing is not so difficult, you sit at a keyboard and you type some keys. That's not super hard. But what is hard is everything that happens in between. It's all those feelings of shame. It's feelings of fear. It's wondering if you're good enough to have an idea. It's wondering if you have the right to actually write this thing you're writing. It's all those kinds of things. It's self-sabotage. Like it's all that stuff that we've talked about. And people are struggling with that. And academics are terrible about talking about feelings. So I am the person that they talk about their feelings about writing with.
Hmm. Now you live in Mexico. What are the joys and oys of for you for living in Mexico?
Oh, yeah, it's so nice here. Um, People are lovely and wonderful. I mean, I think if you're going to live somewhere that's not your home country, you should live somewhere that you really love the people. And I really love people here. They're so wonderful and lovely. Um, and then it's a safe city. I live near an ocean, which is interesting. I've never lived near an ocean, so that's that's a new experience for me. And then it's just been a really nice place to it's been a nice place to develop my business and to develop further into who I want to be as now this business person and kind of this academic off the road. Um, yeah, it's been a good place to sit and think about these things.
How many years of therapy have you had?
How many years of there? Oh, geez, yeah, off and on. I couldn't. I can't even tell you, but it's been some. We'll say that.
Yeah, I've had 10 years. So uh,
Oh, yeah.
to the extent that you feel comfortable, what are some things that you've learned from therapy?
What are some things that I've learned from therapy? Let's see. I've learned. Let's see. I think what's been most helpful to realize is that um, you can feel all of those feelings, all of that self-sabotagey stuff and people pleasing and um, yeah, trying to prove yourself to the world and all of that stuff. You can feel all of that, and that's okay. But that you can make decisions that are empowering from a different place. Like you don't have to keep picking the same thing over and over again. You can make a different choice, and realizing that it's always possible for us to make different choices about who we want to be in the world has felt very powerful to me.
Yeah, that one thing that I learned from 10 years of therapy was that there were always a lot more options than what I saw. That I
Hmm.
would often go into therapy that I have to do A or B, and my therapist would sometimes say, well, why do you need to do anything? Or why not C, D, E?
Yes, absolutely. I remember reading a book once that said something to the effect of if your decision making comes down to this or that, you're probably not considering all your options. I thought, oh, yeah, that's helpful. So yeah, I think we always do have more options than we think.
Did you experience reparenting from therapy? Uh,
Oh, can you tell me more about that?
yeah. So my mother died when I was 3. She was sick for the 2 years previous to that, and my stepmother had some pretty significant health problems, meaning that she wasn't mentally stable. So
Oh.
I grew up and developed a rage at women, among
Mhm.
simultaneously with putting them on a pedestal. So so it was good for me to have a stable relationship with a stable yet intense yet open and honest relationship with women who I wasn't having sex with, and so I didn't have sex
Mm.
with any of my
Mhm.
therapists, but
Right.
almost all my therapists were female, so that was helpful to me to have these stable, honest, sometimes intense relationships with women. That the relationships weren't sexual, and I kind of felt I got a little bit of reparenting. I got a little bit of that female nurturing that I longed for all my life, without,
Mhm.
you know, buying a hooker.
Yeah. I think reparenting, I think what I've come to realize about that is that we can parent ourselves. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of when you feel those urges to self-sabotage, those urges to act in these ways that ultimately are not good for us. Um, I think if you subscribe to the idea of the inner child, and I think I do, um, yeah, you can reparent that inner child. I think you can treat them like you would treat any other child. I think you can validate that for them, like, yeah, I understand why you feel this way, and I think you can explain things to them. But I think those inner children desperately need us to be the adults in their lives, not behave ourselves like children, which I know a lot of adult people who are essentially who essentially behave like children because they just haven't received great parenting, or inadequate parenting, or absent parenting, or neglect, or any number of reasons. So I think we can reparent ourselves to some degree.
So you blogged about reinvention, and I pretty much went through my life continually trying to reinvent myself, but I would
Hmm.
always run into the same sort of problems that have caused me to so desperately want to reinvent myself in the first place. So pretty much all my attempts at reinvention were failures. What have been your
Hmm.
experiences with reinvention, and what does it mean to you?
I Yeah, I think you can. I mean, I see how I've made several reinventions in my life, but then I think it's up to us to discover the underlying dynamics. Like, why is this not working? Why am I making these choices that are going to land me back here again? And I think a lot of that takes place at subconscious levels that we're not even aware of. But I think becoming aware of those patterns, I think that gives us power and awareness to be able to alter those dynamics, alter those old patterns when we feel ourselves falling into them, because they're comforting in a way. I mean, sort of, I think about my own dysfunctions, and I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of attached to them, because they've just been with me for a long time. So how to make different choices instead, and really engineer genuine reinvention, as opposed to, I think I find myself in the same dynamic over and over again.
So you believe in reinvention. You believe it's possible, and
I
I'm going.
do.
Yeah. And so I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I really
off
do.
wonder. I was listening to this series on American identity from the teaching company, and when I heard of the topic, I thought that's stupid. There's no American identity because there are so many different nations in America. Don't tell me that there's American identity. But then
Hmm.
the series argued that a lack of fatalism is part of the American identity. And then I thought about it and go, yeah, compared to every other country of which I'm aware, there's a distinctive lack of fatalism in among Americans. And
Yes.
there's also a great belief in the power of the individual to reinvent or to pragmatically
Mm-hmm.
or ingeniously find a solution to life's problems, while pretty much every
Mm-hmm.
other country seems far more fatalistic. Any thoughts?
Yep, I think that's probably true. We have boundless optimism in the power of change. And I think, but I do think there is, um, I want to believe that we can change our patterns as individuals and make different choices. Um, I mean, I said to somebody the other day, God, I need to go back to therapy because I need to straighten all this stuff out. And they said, no, well, maybe not. Like maybe you can just be aware of how these patterns work in your life, and maybe you can make some different choices. I was like, oh, is it just that simple? It might just be that simple. I don't know.
Hmm. Do you think there is American identity, and if so, how would you describe it?
Yes, I think there's definitely. I mean, it's almost a negative. Yeah, the United States is. It's hard. It's easier to see when you're not in the United States. Um, and I think that's one of the things I realized living abroad and kind of looking at the United States as being like, wow, it's really weird. Every time I go back to the States, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of culture shocked. Like people are, what do I notice? Oh, people are very direct. People are very, they will tell you exactly how things are. And like in a lot of cultures that I've experienced, it's really, people will kind of talk around things and you kind of really have to listen to what's happening. Um, People are, I think, I think very, I think a lot of people are still invested in the American dream for better or for worse, the idea that things are going to be better in the future, and for their children. Um, I think there's definitely some sort of, I mean, things have changed a lot in the last couple of years, but I mean, I read about the 1920s and the 1930s and the development of like I'm writing something right now about the development of travel as a consumer product. I'm like, oh yeah, it kind of is. You know, we consume other cultures, we consume travel, we even if we don't go places, like we still buy stuff and have it in our homes that kind of suggests that we're worldly travelers. I'm like, huh, that's really, it's interesting that we, sort of the big we, it's interesting that we do that.
What was your PhD doctorate in? I mean, the
Uh,
topic.
Latin American Latin American history, and then I focused on cultural relationships between Guatemala and the United States in the 1930s.
And can you tell me more about that?
I can. So it was really so one of the things we know about Central America is we know that in the early 20th century there was this free market these private enterprises came to Central America, came to Latin America, and they extracted wealth from people for their own ends. I'm thinking in particular of the United Fruit Company in Guatemala and Costa Rica and other places. Um, and so we kind of know about that. It's kind of this economic imperialism that is a well-known, it's a fairly well-known story. If you know Latin America at all, um, sort of that commodity export capitalism is a pretty well-known story. But what seemed like a less well-known story to me, and what I found in my archival research, was that there's this whole a cultural economy and maybe an ethno-economy that supports that. And so there's a lot of cultural exchanges happening in the 1930s for different reasons, but it also helps to soften kind of this more evident economic imperialism that's happening at the same time. So I look at things like textile expositions, I look at film, what else? Archaeological tourism, um, world's fairs, museums, like those kinds of things are really interesting to me.
Graham Greene, are you a fan of Graham Greene? His books like The Power and the Glory?
I don't know if I do. I know his books. I don't. I would have to look. I
Oh,
might.
okay. Yeah, he was a novelist. He wrote The Power and the Glory about Mexico's socialist revolution in the 1930s. For,
Oh, I'll have to look.
yeah, from an American perspective, most Americans wouldn't really know the difference between a Mexican and a Guatemalan. Culturally,
Hmm.
what are the differences between Mexicans and Guatemalans?
Well, they have. I mean, this is an obvious answer, but they have different histories. I mean, Mexico had this tremendous revolution in the early um, 20th century, and Guatemala had a revolution too, but they also had, um, because of these sort of this wave of capitalist enterprise, they also had, Guatemala had the first real post World War II intervention by the US. So there was a coup orchestrated by the CIA that overthrew the democratically elected government of Guatemala in 1954. And that set into motion a series of events that culminated in what's been considered to be genocide against Mayan people. And so that is a very different story than Mexico. So it's a story of violence, and it's a story of racial and cultural oppression at the same time.
But how would that manifest if let's say I employ a Guatemalan and I employ a Mexican? I mean, what should I know, say, as an employer or someone who's interacting with Mexicans and Guatemalans here in Los Angeles? What are some differences?
I think there's a greater sense of national identity in Mexico. Like, if you ask Mexicans if they're Mexican, most of the time they'll be like, well, yes, yes, absolutely. Um, on the other hand, Guatemala has a much weaker sense of nation. I mean, the state forcibly tried to exterminate people. And so there's not a whole lot of allegiance to a state as a political entity. Um, but I mean, phenotypically, I mean, Mexico and Guatemala both have large indigenous populations. People who reach the United States, sometimes they are not Spanish speakers. Often, sometimes they're indigenous language speakers or Mayan language speakers. And they are geographically very close. So you might, I mean, at first glance, you might not make that distinction. If you listen very carefully, they will speak differently. There are definite speech patterns in Guatemala that are different than Mexican Spanish.
Now, Guatemala is one of the highest violent crime rates in the world.
Hmm.
How did you operate when you were in Guatemala?
So let's see, I've lived in Guatemala twice. The first time was my Peace Corps service, and I lived in an indigenous community that was 98% ethnically Mayan. And so that was quite the experience. But I felt safe there. Um, that was a good experience. So there was that. And that was 2.5 years. I went back to Guatemala to do my doctoral research, and I lived in Guatemala City. And Guatemala City was kind of terrifying. It is a violent city, and you do have to be very careful there. So I walked to the archive 20 minutes a day, one way, and I was always very careful. I was always very aware and alert when I was doing that. But nothing ever happened to me in Guatemala City. And then I lived in Antigua as well. And that's the only place I've ever been robbed, was in Antigua. And Antigua is far more touristy than Guatemala City.
What about male-female relations, particularly with an emphasis on how they might be different from America? Say you've lived in Mexico and you've lived in Guatemala, and you've of course lived in America. What are some differences in the way the sexes relate?
I think there's just differences in terms of, well, there's definitely differences in terms of gender roles. Like there's definitely I think, much clearer kind of male-female gender roles, although, I mean, there are, like Latin America has pride, Latin America has trans people, those people exist here too. Um, One thing that is particularly notable about Latin America in general, and I think Mexico and Guatemala in particular, are very high rates of femicide. There's just astronomical rates of um, women being murdered every single day, and it's I think they're often seen as disposable.
How would you describe macho culture? Because Mexico strikes me as having a fairly macho culture.
I think it does. It's definitely. Um, let's see. Do I have any really good examples of this? Yeah, I think sometimes it's yeah, I think sometimes men are men and women are women. Like men do manly things, women do like there's just certain I think that, like, for example, when I was in Guatemala, women rarely, and I think it's probably different now. The last time I was there was 2013, like, but women rarely drove, like rarely. They did, but not in great numbers. And that might be changing now, but I feel like there's clear, and I think this is probably true in most of the world, that there's clear things that men do and clear things that women do, and things that men do and men don't do and women don't do. Like it's different. I don't know.
My understanding of Mexico is that it has about a 10% European population that pretty much dominates, runs the country, and occupies almost
Hmm.
all the elite roles. Is that accurate?
I think that's probably accurate. I think that's accurate for Guatemala as well. I don't know if I'd say it's 10%. It might be smaller than that. But there's definitely um, a very small minority that is in control of much of the wealth in, I think, both Mexico and Guatemala.
Uh, would you describe yourself as a feminist? And if so, how do you then relate to this very sexually, racially stratified countries that you love so much?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know. Um, I think I feel like I approach things as an anthropologist. Like I think I watch things a lot. I think my goal is to really understand how things work rather than trying to change things myself, because it's can you change culture? Um, yeah, I don't know. Can I personally change this entire culture? Absolutely not. Um, it is a hard question. I mean, how do you exist as kind of the outsider um, in different kinds of places? It's a liminal space, to be sure.
Like, what about at a pub, a bar? I assume it's mainly men drinking with men, and are there women in bars or pubs in Mexico?
Yes, I have been to. You can kind of, there are certain pubs that are okay, and then certain ones you absolutely just would not go in. Some of the I guess some of them are more respectable than others.
You list on your Twitter bio intellectual dilettante. What do you mean by that?
Yes. I mean that I'm interested in a lot of different things in life. It's hard for me to have a single interest about something forever. I like to know about a lot of different kinds of things.
Now, you talk about overcoming writing resistance. Is this something that you
Hmm.
struggled with?
Yes, and a lot of the people I work with, they're struggling from it as well, because I think writing it's always a creative process. It's always a creative venture, and so anytime we're doing work that is outside of our comfort zones, or um, could be judged, or that forces us to be in vulnerable spaces, I think that is a form of self-sabotage. Your brain is trying to keep you out of those spaces, and keep you away from feeling vulnerable. So people get writer's block, or people can't think of what to say, or people are resistance shows up for people in so many different ways. But I think once you identify how it shows up for you, then you can think about how to get around it. And so one of the ways that I tell people to get around it is, one, keep writing. And two, you don't have to give it any more brain space than it already has. Like, maybe just validate it and recognize it and name it. Like, oh, yeah, I'm in resistance. It's okay. And then you keep moving on. And people feel, people like that approach because they get to, it allows them to not feel like there's something wrong with them. Like, oh, resistance is just normal. Like, it's okay. It happens to everybody. It's not a big deal. Because people get very wrapped up in stories about how they're not good enough, or they'll never get anything done, or blah, blah, blah. And none of that is necessarily true.
Had your blog post prior to the one that went viral, had they been equally raw, or was this new?
There were a few, I think the blog was interesting because the more I got vulnerable with feelings on the blog, the more people responded to it. And so I had been I write a lot about issues of shame in writing, issues of fear in writing, resistance in writing, those chronic fears that we're not good enough as writers. I write a lot about that kind of stuff, but nothing had gotten as much attention as writing about grief.
Well, in particular, your grief about not having a career in academia. I mean, you could write 15 posts about grief, but you went viral with this one particular aspect of grief.
Yep, I sure did. It was, yeah, it seemed to really hit for people, because I think, I don't know what I know what maybe a few people's experiences are like, but I think most people, I'm not sure that people, and there have been posts since mine that are much better written and are really much more cogent examinations of all these issues. But I think it just really expressed feelings for people, because academics, I think, have a hard time expressing feelings, and to express something, like grief from being excluded from this thing that you had trained for years, that really hit for people.
I don't think you've written a blog post in about 18 months. What's going on?
Yeah, so let's see. Part of it was that I got real employment. So I was working as a study abroad director. And part of what people liked about my blog was kind of reading about, like, my angsty life, and reading about what I was ruminating about over here, and like what my feelings were about this or that. And I stopped as the feelings of grief started seeding. I started feeling like I had less to say. I was like, oh God, is anybody going to read like my normal life in which I'm like having a nice life? Is anybody going to read that? I wasn't sure if people would read it. And so it felt like it kind of didn't have the same purpose that it did. And then the other thing that happened was that I started, about a year ago, I started a community on Mighty Networks. And so I'm blogging monthly there for a community of writers that I'm building. And so I'm going back further to, I'm going back around to practical tips for writers. But there's still some good stuff on the blog. Like, I have a memoir on there about my Peace Corps experience, and a lot of people have read that. A lot of people write to me about that, like, "Oh, are you saying I shouldn't be a Peace Corps volunteer?" And I'm like, no, I'm just saying it's complicated. That's all.
Have you tried ayahuasca or indigenous medicine?
I have not.
And do you have any thoughts on that fad?
I don't know enough about it. I think I should not probably comment on it if I don't know about it.
Wow. You've imbibed the best of academia there. Not many
I know,
people.
I know, I know. I can't tell if is it better or worse to not comment on something you don't know about, or should you just make some stuff up and call it good?
So you haven't you, you haven't had a desire to try mushrooms, ayahuasca, indigenous medicine people.
I think I've been invited to do those things and I have not taken advantage of them yet. So I can't I don't know. I'm not sure they would work for me. I'm not sure that's going to be my healing method.
Uh, because you hate drugs, because you're very rational, because you're afraid
Uh,
of the dangers.
probably a little bit of all of those things. I also think I mean healing works for people in different ways. I think you can um yeah, I think some people do heal that way. I think some people are able to find um, maybe not answers, but at least some way to understand their experience through substances, through drugs, through different kinds of hallucinogenic experiences. I don't think I'm one of those people.
You mentioned that there were people who'd written even more cogent critiques of leaving academia than yourself. Any names come to mind?
I think if you were to Google like grief, academia, something like that, like I think probably a lot of people have written about that.
Okay. Did you reach out to some of these people? Did you do that or did you not?
Not really. People reached out to me, which was very surprising. Um, People in the time that that post went viral, for probably a week or two afterwards, people were writing to me a lot. People were sending me a lot of email, like, "Wow, like this really said something that I couldn't say." Um, a lot of people I think had not. Um, a lot of people had not felt like it was okay to say that they were in grief. A lot of people, um, I think people felt like, yeah, it was shameful to feel grief around, shameful to feel grief around something like that. Like it wasn't serious enough to merit grief. And I think my post says that it pretty much says that it is. And so I think that helps validate that for a lot for people.
So you mentioned a lot of people reached out to you, but you don't recall reaching
Hmm.
out to anyone with regard to their stories about grief and leaving academia. Are you the type of person who perhaps
No.
does not reach out very much?
I just felt like it was very personal. Like I didn't want to burden other people with that story. If people wanted to find that story and read it, like that was fine, but I didn't feel like I was ready to talk about it with other people outside of my blog post. I thought I had said what I wanted to say.
But are you the type of person who does not reach out very much? Do you, after, when you read a great book or a great essay, do you send an email? Do you reach out to people if you get an idea or a story that moves you?
That's a good question. I think occasionally I will tweet people. I'll send someone a tweet like, "Hey, I read this article you wrote and I thought it was really great." Um, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I would reach out. Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Bashful, shy, reserved? What's going on? I'm just curious.
Um, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think everybody's process is so individual. I don't know that, yeah, I don't know if I would, I just don't feel like I would reach out to people and be like, "Hey, me too." Because it is an individual process, I think, to some degree.
Yeah, but I'm not just talking about grief and academia. I'm talking about anything.
Oh, in general.
Yeah, in general.
In general, yeah, I think people probably describe me as, I think people probably describe me as reserved, definitely introverted, reserved, sometimes shy.
Is there a true self, a true Lisa Munro, or are you simply different in different circumstances so that the idea of a true self has no truth?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a hard one because I think we all have different selves that we put on for different people. I think there's probably something real and true in there. But again, it's I think it's a hard thing for adopted people to reconcile with because you are in between families. You are in between a life that you didn't live and a life that you are living. You are in between people who raised you, but you were not born to, and people you were born to who didn't raise you. So I think there is sort of um, a split self in certain respects. I realized recently that I own two of a lot of things, and I was like, oh yeah, because I have two. There's definitely like duality is a real theme in my life, and I think that's probably why.
Is life in Mexico or in Guatemala, does it come with a payoff of getting to run away, avoid, or hide life in America?
That's a good question. I felt good being in Mexico. I've been here, let's see, when did I get here? Been here since February of 2018. So I got to miss a lot of miss a lot of the Trump presidency, and I was not sad about that.
Interesting. So I I got a lot of help from this 12-step program called Underearners Anonymous, and I think I just want to
Oh.
read to you some of the symptoms of underearning according to this one particular
Mhm.
program and see if any of it pings your thinking. So one symptom is time indifference. We do not use our time to support our own vision. Idea deflection. We compulsively reject ideas that could expand our lives. Compulsive need to prove. Clinging to useless possessions. Exertion, exhaustion. We habitually overwork, become exhausted, then underwork or cease work completely. Giving away our time. We compulsively volunteer. Undervaluing and underpricing, we undervalue our abilities and services. Isolation, we choose to work alone when it might serve us much better to have co-workers, associates, or employees. Physical ailments, sometimes out of fear of being larger or exposed, we experience physical ailments. Symptom 10, misplaced guilt or shame. We feel uneasy when asking for or being given what we need or what we are owed. Symptom 11, not following up. We do not follow up on opportunities, leads, or jobs. And 12, stability, boredom. We create unnecessary conflict with other people, generating problems that may result in financial distress. Anything there ping your thinking?
I think probably a lot of those described me in the past, but I feel like now I think I'm very invested in overcoming a lot of that thinking. I mean, I run my own business and I feel like I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay financially, I'm doing okay mentally. Um, yeah, so I think a lot of that stuff, I mean, I think part of it, because those patterns are so deep, will probably always be there. But then I think the point is to use, for example, like the 12-step model to make new pathways for ourselves. And, you know, maybe the old ones will always be visible, but to start using those new pathways and using new habits and using new kinds of knowledge and learning to ultimately empower ourselves. So I feel like I'm on my way. I'm well on my way.
And were there any turning points as you start getting on your way that stand out to you?
Um, let's see, turning points. I don't know if there's been any kind of like watershed moments where I was like, wow, this, you know, now I see everything clearly. I think it's been a very long process of realizing that a lot of the messaging, I think, um, I had just internalized a lot of stuff, adoptee stuff and cultural beliefs about money, and you know, your parents always affect how you think about money, and blah blah blah. And So I think I had just absorbed a lot of that and internalized a lot about that. And so it's been interesting to examine those beliefs and be like, oh, this one is actually not right. This one is wrong and it's not serving me. So I can do something different.
Have you read any books or essays in the last few months that have really rocked your world?
What I've loved recently, I have become addicted to the series The Expanse, which is not something I would normally. I'm not a science fiction person, so it was surprising to me. So I watched the whole series and I was thrilled with it. And so now I'm reading the books, and they're great.
Okay, awesome. What should I ask you, which I've forgotten to ask you? Or is it,
Oh,
what should I ask you that I've forgotten to ask you?
Gosh, that's a good question. Is there anything that you would like to know that I can answer?
Yeah, hang on. Let me. Oh, how many friends? Well, I get a thrill being on a university campus. I mean, I get it's thrilling for me. But at the same time, I'm thinking about a girlfriend I had who, for many years, was with a leading Hollywood director, and so she cannot go to anything that reminds her of Hollywood because she gets a panic attack. So, is stepping onto a university campus a thrill for you? Is it a panic attack? Is it what is it?
Usually it feels familiar, and then sometimes it makes me a little sad.
Hmm.
But it's a manageable sad. Like it's not like I feel like I'm being stabbed in the heart. It's just like, well, maybe that could have been, but it's not. So on we go. I like university libraries. I like being in libraries. I feel good there. So sometimes I'm using the library at different universities. And I do enjoy being in them. But there's always a little feeling of sadness about what will never be.
I occasionally have nightmares about there's a test and I've forgotten or I'm late. Do you have those nightmares?
I have a recurring dream, and my recurring dream is that I've forgotten something, and I have to go back and get it. I can't. And I haven't had it in a while, but there was a time, and it happens in different ways. It's like maybe I've left a backpack on a park bench and I have to get back on the bus and go find it and I can't find the bus. So maybe it's like that. Or like maybe I left something in an airport and I have to go back through security or I have to like leave the airport and try and find the thing again. I can't figure out how to do it. So it's always the same dream, but it comes to me in different ways.
What would it feel like for you to step back on your high school campus?
Oh, it looked like a prison to me. And the rumor was a prison architect had designed it, and I just have no desire to do that.
How do you navigate your relationships and friendships with people who are more and less successful than you?
Oh, that's a good question. I really think that comparison really is the thief of joy. So there was a time when I would read about people getting research fellowships or some kind of funding or applying for jobs that I could have applied to or things that I could have done and didn't. And it was like being stabbed in the heart. Like it really felt that way for a while. But as I continue down my own road, I realize that like there's enough for everybody. Like I don't need to be in competition with these people for these scarce resources because I'm not doing that anymore. And it's okay. And that there are different kinds of resources in my world and different kinds of things that I can access and do that don't require me to feel jealous and um, yeah, feel jealous about other people's success.
If you put a gun to my head and said, "Luke, what do you do best?" I would say I do best at interviewing people compared to all my skills. This is I think this is my best one. If someone, God forbid, put a gun to your head and said, "What do you do best out of all your skills? What do you do best?" What would you say?
I'm a writer. I write well. That's my best skill. And
But
and not even always academic writing either. Sometimes it's different kinds of writing.
so, what type of writing do you do best?
I'm a good academic writer. I have a strong voice for doing that, and I'm still working on my scholarship. I have an article that's coming out here soon. I just published something. I'm going to hopefully work on my book manuscript, and then I'd like to branch out and do some different kinds of writing. Like I'd like to do creative nonfiction. I'd like to try memoir. Like there are different genres that um, I'd like to try that I think can ultimately have a bigger reach and a bigger impact.
So, the type of first person writing that I usually enjoy the easiest is shame. Like when people delve into shame, that's just immediately compelling. On the other hand, we all want to construct an image for ourselves, and you also have a business. So, how do you balance emotional honesty in your writing, delving into shame, because everybody loves to read about what somebody is ashamed of, and on the other hand, developing your image, you're this professional businesswoman, you're a coach, you're helping academics, you're doing all these things. How do you balance those two contradictory impulses?
Yeah, I think you can be. I think it's okay to talk. I want people to know that it's okay to talk about dark stuff. Like that's okay. Um, and I talk about my dark stuff a little bit with people so that they know it's okay. And then they can talk to me a little bit about their dark stuff too. Like I don't think we necessarily need to, it's rare that I would approach a total stranger and be like, "Hello, I need to share my darkest struggle with you." Um, but it's like that's not what I'm gonna do. But I think it's like on the blog, like I feel good about the work I did there because it does give people kind of this opening to be like, "Oh yeah, hey, me too." Like I've felt that, I relate, I see. Um, and then people I think can feel freer talking about their own stuff when they see somebody else who's sharing that emotion with them.
If Simon and Schuster offered you $15,000 to write a memoir on the theme of 27 things that I'm ashamed of, would you go for that?
Um, I think I could probably do it. God, 27 is a lot. Could I do 27? Maybe. I would try. I would sure try. Because I think anytime you shine a light on those dark corners of the soul, like it really, I think it's enlightening. I'm thinking about this exhibition I went to. It was at the San Diego Museum of Man, and I think it's called Post Secret. And it's people who write their most shameful secrets on a postcard and they leave them. And now there's a museum exhibit about it. And I think it's on Instagram. Like I think you can actually find some of the postcards there. Um, God, and people have some really awful, shameful things to secrets, right? Like secrets, and oftentimes they're things that people are very ashamed to. They would be very ashamed to share, but they are in this very public way because it's anonymous. So, but I think work like that is helpful. Like you read something and you're like, "Wow, that's really awful," and I kind of relate to that.
Are you a spiritual person? And if so, what does it mean?
That's a good question. Let's see. I think I believe in powers greater than myself, but can't really explain them. I think that's where I've landed so far.
And God?
I think exists. There's been too many things I've I've personally experienced, just things that happen in my life that have seemed pretty miraculous. So I'd like to say that God exists.
Okay, as an interviewer, I can't let that go without following up. Would you share? I also have experienced the transcendent. I felt like I and the universe, I and God had some kind of meeting. Um,
Hmm.
but I'd have a heck of a time describing it. But I gotta push you and see if you can describe any experience you might have had with the transcendent.
Yes, I think I felt like in the presence of something larger than myself, a lot of times in nature, a lot of times in caves. A lot of people really hate caves because they are claustrophobic and kind of scary for people. I'm a fan. I really feel like they are magical and they're special, and I can see why maybe ancient native people thought they were very holy places as well. And so I think I often feel like I'm to the point like when I'm in like I've gone to different caves in my life and seen these spectacular formations, and I'm like, yep, I feel like I'm in the presence of something much greater than myself here. Like it seems improbable that I don't know, natural processes created these things. And I'm like, yeah, I think, is it? Well, maybe. I choose to believe there's something bigger going on there.
And who are your anthropologist heroes?
Oh, my anthropologist heroes. Let's see. Right now, I'm writing an article about I'm writing an article about women adventurers to Latin America in the 1920s and 30s, and this idea of adventure as consumer products and some other things too. But there are a lot of really interesting women showing up in that article, and some of them are anthropologists, and some of them are just exploring just because they just want to.
Very gingerly, I'm going to introduce a thought from the manosphere.
Okay,
Very gingerly, but
okay.
there's a cliche in the manosphere that when women say that they like to travel, single women, when they say they like to travel, a large component of it is that they're after erotic experiences that they would not feel good about if it became widely known where they live.
Huh, that's interesting. Let's see. So the research I've done so far on this, and this is a brand new article for me, so I'm still reading sources, and so I haven't drawn super firm conclusions yet. But one of the things I find is that these women, they wanted to have these authentic experiences with with indigenous cultures, really. So some kind of cultural other. And so they travel Latin America. I mean, what they want to see, and so many of these women are not, they're not interested to travel to like go shopping. Like that's not really what they want to do, but they go because they want to have some kind of experience that's outside of their everyday life. And so Native people, I think, really have this appeal to these women because they saw them as um, kind of like these idyllic, like pre-capitalist communities. Like we know that's not true, right? Like we know that Native people have been just as changed by capitalism as Western societies. Like we know that, but um, they really thought that they were kind of these pre-modern relics trapped in this pre-capitalist past, and they wanted to have that experience. So they go very specifically looking for Native people oftentimes.
But they don't talk about seeking erotic adventures.
No, they what I have I just was reading over some articles recently what several women mentioned that they were interested in. They were interested in the headhunting tribes of Ecuador. And so they one woman brings these shrunken heads back to the United States. And that seems to be like the cultural boundary that sort of defines barbarism for them, or it's like these shrunken heads. So, but a lot of them mention going to Ecuador and looking for I think they're Jivaro people, and finding them to be kind of on that sort of outside their own cultural boundaries, and being the first white women, or at least they thought they were, to interact with these people. So it's sort of about conquest and exploration, and yeah, and also that line between what they perceived as civilization and barbarism.
And were they seeing reality, or were they seeing through a prism of white savior complex? Were they just seeing what they wanted to see?
I think what they thought they were looking at were authentic cultural practices from the pre-Columbian period, which is not really what was happening, because we know that cultures change, and we know learn new things, and people change things, and culture is always changing. It's always in flux. So the idea that there's this popular idea that these women are experiencing native cultures, like these pre-Hispanic native cultures, but they're not really, but they thought they were. So they are, I think, seeing what they want to see there.
What did you notice about academic cliques?
About academic what?
Cliques, C-L-I-Q-U-E-S.
Cliques? Oh, as in like, yeah, I think there are, well, it's hard to say now that I'm not so much in that, but there's definitely kind of groups of people who stick together on certain things, whether they stick together on the force of somebody's personality, or somebody's ideas, or different schools of thought. I mean, they definitely exist. I don't have much to do with them, but I think they definitely exist.
So perhaps not having much to do with cliques is not a path for success in academia?
Let's see. So put another way, that to be a successful academic, you need to join a clique?
No, that it can help.
That it can help. Yes, I think it can definitely help. I mean, if you attach yourself to certain people and ideas that are popular, or well-known, or groundbreaking, or whatever, yeah, I think you can. I think you can gain a certain a status. Maybe that's the right word. Yeah, maybe you can gain a certain status, or you can become well-known in certain circles.
Did you try attaching yourself to any cliques? Did you try flattery and then hate yourself for it?
That's a good question. I don't. I'm thinking back to like having professional colleagues in grad school. Like, who was I hanging out with? I think I think I was probably more independent than the average graduate student. Like,
I would say, yeah.
I think
that's the safe.
yeah, I was really doing my own thing, and part of doing my own thing was that my dissertation was so much an attempt to just explain my Peace Corps experience to myself, and really understand what had happened there, and then what my role was in the story of Guatemala. You know, what was my role in people's stories of violence and oppression, and trying to understand that. And it, I don't know if that was very, you know, it's not a super, it's not like a really,
it's not trendy. You didn't check out
it's
the latest
not trendy.
trends.
No,
Lisa.
I really didn't, because it was just really personal to me. And so, like, you know, is my work super groundbreaking? Like, no, but it means something to me, and it helps me think about certain things. And I hope it helps other people think about other things.
Are you going to publish it as a popular book?
I would like to. Like, I think that the memoir I have on my blog, I think, is a good start. And that's kind of how I saw it. I was like, oh, well, like maybe this develops into a chapter. And so maybe it's like kind of memoir, me looking back, and then maybe it's like some analysis, and then maybe some more memoir. Like maybe it's like that.
What was your relationship like with your dissertation advisor?
It was good. It was professional. He is a brilliant person. I have nothing but respect for him, and um, and I'm, yeah, I think that that should be the norm in academia, and yeah, I know a lot of people whose advisors were terrible.
And then what did you have orals? What was that experience like?
That was not a great experience. I just wasn't very well. I just was not well prepared for that, so it didn't go very well. I didn't pass the first time. I did manage to pass the second time. There was a lot of crying in between, but it feels like, I mean, your exams feel like such a big deal as a graduate student, and then much like your dissertation, then you're done and like nobody cares.
I got to ask. Tell me more. Like, tell me about the first time. Like, we want to know about pain. What did they ask you that you weren't prepared for? I mean,
Oh, it's. I mean, mostly you just have to demonstrate that you have a grasp on certain debates in the field, that you know certain foundational works. It's a lot of reading, and I just didn't study very hard. Well, I mean, I thought I was studying the right things, but yeah, then my committee asked me questions, and I was like, I don't even know. Like, I got nothing. So it was not a great experience, but um, I regrouped, and then it was fine.
what were some of the questions that they asked you, if I may
I
ask?
can't I
Can't even
can't even
remember.
remember. I can't even
What are the
remember,
major
but it was
debates in
like,
your field that might have come up in
I
orals?
know, like I'm trying to even
You've
remember because I
blocked
was
it
like
out. You've
so.
blanked it
I
out.
think I've
So
blocked it
painful.
out because it was
Yeah.
so awful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but a lot of, and that was not everybody's experience either. Like a lot of people I know had nice, comprehensive exam experiences. A lot of people were like, yeah, it was kind of hard, but it was okay. I was like, ugh, yeah, I thought it was awful, but yeah, everybody's got a different story.
Well, what were the major debates in your field at that time?
Um, let's see. There's debates about, um, God, I can't even remember like what was going on there. But people want to know. I mean, what's complicated about history is that sometimes the best thing we know about something, like the book that changes the way that we think about things, is not necessarily the most recent work. And so like maybe the the book that kind of shook the foundations about what we thought we knew about something, maybe it came out in 19, I don't know, 47, and that's the book you're supposed to know about, right? Like not everything that came later you need to know about this book, because that's the book that changed everybody's thinking on something. And I can't even think of any really great examples, but sometimes the in history, sometimes the most recent work is not the best, or it's not the most. That's not how I wanted to say that. Sometimes the most recent work is not the most important, and so it makes it a little bit of a complicated field to study.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, Lisa, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you. You've given me
Well,
over
thanks, Luke.
2 hours of your time and allowed me
I
to
so
ask a lot of
appreciate
painful
it.
questions. Every
I
time you
don't
touch on
mind. Thank.
something painful, it's like, okay, I want to go there.
Yeah, I know, right? Because isn't that like
Yeah.
that's what everybody wants to hear
Yeah.
about?
Does it hurt when I
Absolutely.
poke you here?
I exactly. Here,
Ouch.
is this the
Okay.
most painful? Exactly. Is this the most painful thing you've ever experienced? Let's talk
Yeah.
about that. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. But that's what people, that's what people like to read about. People want to read about conflict and pain, and nobody wants to read about, my life is great. Nobody
Oh
wants to read
no.
about that.
No. No. We love
Yep.
Sturm and Drang. So yeah, shame.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Shame is
Absolutely.
just a
And that.
gold
Oh
mine.
God. Yeah, people love that. So let me ask you this. So what happens now? You, I assume, process all this
Yeah,
interview,
yeah,
and then are
we're
you
live on YouTube right now, so
okay?
I'm gonna leave this stream up on YouTube and upload it to different video sharing sites, and also strip it to an MP3 and upload it to SoundCloud, which goes out to iTunes, Google Podcasts, etc.
All right. Well, I hope somebody finds this interview useful and illuminating.
Great. Do you have any additional final words? Anything you want to finally
I
share?
I don't. I don't. This has been fun.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Lisa. And I'm going to end the stream and